Jeannie here today. I'm so glad to be joined by an incredible singer, award-winning, Grammy-nominated songwriter, and the main worship leader of Elevation Church, Chris Brown. We are going to be talking about the new record, Lion. We're going to be talking about worship and all that the Lord has put on his heart. Chris, thank you for chatting with me.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's always awesome to talk to a fellow worshiper. I'm a worship leader as well. I am just always excited to hear what God is doing and stirring in other people. So you got Lion. Lion is here, the album. Before we really get into it, though, I want to talk because there might be people who don't even know how Elevation Music came to be what it is today. So if you can kind of give us a little synopsis, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'll try my best to give a snapshot. So the church, we're a part of a church, Elevation Worship is, and we're based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And Pastor Stephen Furtick is our pastor. He's also a primary songwriter and has been for years with us. He and I knew each other as teenagers, and we knew each other playing in bands together, little punk rock bands. And so I knew him well before he was a preacher, as a musician, as a singer and songwriter back then at 16. And so it's like a dream getting to still do that with him all these years later. But I've been here for 15 years. I came about a year into the church being planted, and we've been writing songs really since day one of myself coming on, and that vision was always in his heart for Elevation to be a worshiping church, for Elevation to have songs that we're writing and giving language to our people for what God's doing here through our ministry. And of course it's evolved stylistically, it's evolved musically through the years, and all of it has been just a wild blessing, also, weighty to continue to figure out how to carry what God has given us to carry, but privileged, so honored to be a part, and so yeah, here we are, 2022. I think they said, I have lost count, but I saw somewhere that this was our 14th album that we had released. And so Lion has just come out when we're having this interview, and it's been a fun one. We've worked for the last 18 months on it. So
wow. Well, yeah, I want to definitely transition to that because, you guys are now in a place where people everywhere are singing your music, and like you said, there is a kind of a pressure probably that comes with that, creating worship music and new sounds to release into the atmosphere of worship and expressions of worship. So let's talk about Lion. I love the title. I just had a son, and his name is Elianijah. We call him Leo, and I say he's my little lion. And I know what that means for us, right? Because we want him to be bold, and we want him to go out there and be fierce for the Lord. But talk about Lion and kind of how that came about.
Yeah, so I said we've been working on it for 18 months. We didn't start 18 months ago though and say we're gonna produce our next album, much less 18 months ago saying we're gonna call it Lion. We didn't have that. We wrote that song last summer, so coming up on a year ago. But there are songs on this album that have been around, and I think been trying to find their place on a project for at least that long. And a lot of the last couple of years, or maybe even more specifically the last year, one of the things that I think we were discovering that was important to us was we released an album called Graves in the Gardens right at about 2 years ago. And then last year we released Old Church Basement with Mav City. And I think because of both our collaborations, on those albums. Creatively, us getting to work with others creatively, I think coming off of Old Church Basement and the how different we dove into both the writing process, but also like even how to record. We recorded that one so different than we have recorded any previous album. We wrote a lot of the songs just 2 weeks like prior or even week of to
Wow.
that recording. And a lot of our albums, most of them previously have been like very, we know the songs well in advance. We've been singing the songs in church
Mhm.
for most albums for months, and so we kind of we've got our teeth into them. We know how they're going to go. They're produced, and then Old Church Basement comes along, and the name of the game was just like, hey, we're going to be writing up until the very last minute till we press record, and so everybody just stay present and know anything can happen, and we'll get what we get and trust that it's right. And so I just think it's important to for us, that context of where we've been the last couple of years, it opened up the landscape creatively, I believe, for us on what a church song was, you know, what a worship song was.
Mm.
And I think for years, as we were learning to write worship songs and learning um, just the skill side of it, we we wrote, rightfully so, with a lot of rules, um, and we wrote kind of inside a box. And I think the last couple of years have been us like pressing the edges of the box to make it a little bigger. And this album now, Lion, I think it's quite an assortment of what we've been, of styles, and what we've been writing. And you know, a lot of the songs, even to us, we struggled like, is this song supposed to be on like this album, or is it meant for like a totally different project that may not even be Elevation Worship? For instance, the first track on the album is called Bye Bye Babylon,
Love it.
and it's like, it's not like a Sunday morning song, but it's very folky, and but also with just a kind of wild soundscape musicality that's happening. But we didn't think it had any place on an Elevation Worship album, but we knew what it meant to us. Like lyrically, it's rich about the Israelites returning from 50 years in captivity. Um, you know, in Babylon, like Psalm 137 talks about this, and what's happening in the end of Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah, what it was like for these people who had been away from Jerusalem for a generation, and what it was like in the mix of mourning and the mix of celebration, and the old generation, the young generation. I feel like emotionally there's so much involved in that. I don't know that you know, the listeners always gonna necessarily pick up on that, but that's where it came from. So my point in saying all that was just like, I think there's still just as much resonance in that song biblically, and there's it's just very different musically. So
Yeah.
then we go into track two, and it's kind of like what you would expect for Elevation Worship maybe to start an album with. It's like an up tempo kind of church song, but I just think across the album there's this like assortment of,
Mhm.
it's like, you know, a box of chocolates. You don't know what's coming next, and it's like you want salted caramel, you get that flavor. You want a little pistachio centered, you know, you can
Yeah.
have that one. You want some gold flakes on the outside. You get a song, you get a song, you get a song. But we've loved watching it come together. It wasn't something we intentionally set out to do. We just wrote like throughout the last year, and then we found ourselves this past, you know, November or so, like holding all these different types of songs and going like, maybe they are meant to be on one project. Um and then we came in to realize like, oh, the title is that our song Lion, that was kind of a standout as far as a title track months prior, but then we had kind of forgotten about it. And then it came back, um and then Pastor Stephen, we were sitting in a meeting just talking about like, all right, we should name this Lion, right? Like that should be the name of the album. And he's like, all right, here it is, but we don't put a lion on the cover. We put a lamb. And so when he kind of conceptualized that for us, it made, I feel like everything just made sense and everything came into alignment, because it's it is this album that is not like just very singular in its sound. And I'm not trying to over spiritualize like maybe, you know, the title with the cover art, but you know, in the song Lion, we describe God as being the great I am, and louder than thunder, and the king of angels. And all these names are attempts at describing God's nature as ruler, as king of the jungle, as king, you know, our heavenly king. But he's also the sacrificial lamb. He's also like quite opposite of a lion. He's opposite of this terrifying, you know, animal. He's also a meek, gentle lamb that chose sacrifice and chose what servanthood looked like through crucifixion. And he's not one or the other. He's both. He's all of it. And so I think that gave us that concept, honestly put the confidence in us to go, I think both and in terms of styles of songs are supposed to be on this
Right.
on this offering. I think it is supposed to be all encompassing and maybe a surprising juxtaposition to the listener, but that's God. Like
Yeah,
he,
and that's what I was gonna ask, because you're creating worship music, you know, and the responsibility of worship leaders in this day and age, especially one as yourself who is, you know, making songs that people, you know, are singing in their churches. It's like, how do you define what is a worship song? You know, is it the same four chords that we hear all the time? You know, or is it these different expressions? And I think you articulated that beautifully. I did want to ask you because, you know, with the responsibility that comes with what you guys do, you navigate a lot of controversy, especially even in the worship world, you know, where you have other worship leaders that are like, but is it doctrinally sound? Or, you know, all these different things that I'm sure you hear yourself. How do you kind of navigate that, the criticism that comes with the responsibility that you carry? Your pastor, you know, himself, he gets it all the time. How do you guys kind of navigate that, or how do you push back?
well, I think like just generally if we're getting any criticism, um I I grew up in a ministry family. Like I grew up a pastor's kid. My dad served at the same church for 27 years. Um, I had an amazing example in both my parents because my mom was behind the organ every Sunday morning. We literally lived across the street from the church. So at least 5 days a week, I was running the halls of our church. I just grew up in church. And and so like, but I saw even my parents model how to carry ministry and how to be in ministry um, and continue to love people and continue to serve who God called them to serve at our small church in our small town. And I think that has informed a lot of how how I'm raising my kids, and it's informed a lot of how I'm approaching ministry now. And I don't presume in the least to always be perfect or always be even right. I could probably find things that I've said, um, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you probably could too if you searched online, that I don't even necessarily agree with, like maybe the methodology of it anymore.
Mhm.
But that's part of being human. That's part of evolving. Now, if it was not rooted biblically or not rooted scripturally, that's a different thing. But hopefully, too, there's grace for someone who is constantly learning. But I
Mhm.
just think like my approach is I am trying to be as faithful as I know how to God and his bride, and to the church. And a lot of that for me is serving um, week in and week out at our local level, our local church level. I'm This morning I was sitting with a lot of our campus pastors and other supervisors of our staff while we were having a staff meeting. Yesterday, I was working on the set list for Sunday, and we released our album Lion on Friday, and I'm managing what's happening with Elevation Worship, the 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 songs and the brand and the touring and the albums that come with that, but also I know at my heart, in my heart, I'm still like that 17-year-old who felt called to ministry when all I knew at that time was the example my parents had set for me my whole childhood. And that was, be faithful with what God gives you, whether it's the works he's put in your hands to do, the gifts he's given you, the talents, and be faithful to his people. And no one's perfect, but keep serving and trust that God knows your motives, and he'll correct motives that are wrong. And but yeah, I don't know if that is oversimplifying it, but that's kind of my story.
No, I think it's beautiful. It's very humble, and that right there, you're teachable. You know what I mean? It's not like I've arrived. Here I am, the maker of great worship music, and that's it. Like, you are teachable, and that's beautiful. And I think it's why God breathes on your music, regardless of what people say.
Mm.
So let me ask you this: where would you say worship music is headed? I think what I love about you, and not only are you do work with Elevation Music, but you collaborate a lot with other worshipers. And I love that this album is that there's different expressions on it that are still worship. Do you think that that's where worship music is headed?
I don't. Well, I guess you could answer this a couple different ways. Stylistically, I hope it will always just be be a smorgasbord of like different styles and represent the kingdom in so many ways, and colors and palettes and tastes. And so I hope that keeps evolving in people's perspective and viewpoint of what worship music is and church music is, will follow suit and evolve with it. But um I don't know. I hope in addition, of course, to I don't feel, I'll just say this as a disclaimer. I'm not speaking as someone who feels qualified to answer where worship music is heading, but I hope it keeps being honest. I hope it continues to be vulnerable, and not in a way that puts necessarily my feelings over God's truth all the time. I think that's an important thing to at least recognize and be aware of, especially as writers and as worship
Yeah.
leaders and people who are in front of, that um, we're bringing people along and shepherding them in a way that is at least drawing attention to the right things. One, it is okay to be vulnerable before God. I hope you are learning to simply just talk to Jesus. At the same time, I hope you're not staying at a place where you're you're trusting your emotions, or you're staying caught up in your feelings over just what God is saying and what God is maybe challenging you on, or but I think I hope there's a closeness and maybe a gap that is continuing to be closed in the lyrics of songs between, what's the best way to say it? I guess I hope people like learn to, songs keep being written that feel honest. I've said it, but I think that's kind of my hope. And I think it helps it be relatable, but not anything that's going to not relatable in a sense that it's going to deny, the truth of God's word. So yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't even feel qualified. I think like year after year, season after season, album after album, for us, we aim to be as honest, in our writing, is like, where are we right now? What are we sensing? What is God speaking right now for our church? And so that's our goal. And I hope we stay there, as opposed to, we got an idea of where things may be 5 years from now. So let's
Right,
write.
right. Right, right. That's awesome. I love that. Um, well, is there anything else that you'd like to add? I know when you lead under such a big personality like Stephen, and my pastor is Pastor William McDowell, so I understand what it is to have a worshiping pastor
Yeah.
that we lead under. Sometimes people think that we're trying to create movements, and not really just realizing that, hey, we're people that are allowing God to move us, and then we respond. So thank you for sharing your heart. Is there anything else that you'd like to add in that vein, or about Line, or about Elevation at all?
I don't think so. This has been great. I hope people when they, if they're listening to this album, find a song for any point in their day, on a mountaintop, or if they're struggling on a day and feeling like they're going through a valley. I hope they can, identify with a song and find Jesus there, and find the peace of his spirit. And so hopefully people, enjoy this offering from our house. And but yeah, thanks for having me.